Sometimes you have to walk straight into the fire to prove it no longer burns you. At a dazzling fundraising event in downtown Chicago, a woman stepped in with a grace that instantly drew attention, stirring quiet murmurs among the city's elite. Once the overlooked wife of a tech tycoon. Her arrival sent subtle waves through the room, especially when their eyes finally locked. What secrets had she kept hidden, and just how far had she come to reclaim her place? The scent of sparkling wine mingled with the faint aroma of freshly waxed parquet floors. The charity gala was in full swing, a stunning display of influence and affluence where fortunes were paraded under the banner of goodwill. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow across the ballroom, illuminating guests adorned in satin and brocade. Laughter danced across the walls, blending with the soft melodies of a live quartet. Yet behind the grandeur lurked whispers, darting glances, and carefully veiled agendas. Vivienne Devereux stepped through the grand entrance with the poise of a woman who had mastered the art of appearing untouched. Her pearl-toned gown, tailored to perfection, moved like liquid silk as she walked. The fabric shimmered under the light, and small diamond studs graced her ears, matching the bracelet that sparkled around her wrist as she clutched her metallic clutch. On the surface, she was the embodiment of elegance and composure. But inside, she carried the familiar sting of betrayal, the weight of her husband's deception pressing heavily on her chest. As she descended the marble staircase into the ballroom, heads turned. Not in admiration of her beauty, but out of intrigue. Everyone knew who she was. Mrs. Vivienne Devereux, once the devoted wife of Nathan Devereux, a self-made tech mogul whose empire spanned global software ventures, luxury smart homes, and innovative green tech solutions. She had been the supportive wife, always in the background, while Nathan took center stage. But tonight, the same eyes that once looked past her lingered, trying to read the fire beneath her calm exterior. She spotted him almost instantly, Nathan, laughing beside the champagne display, surrounded by a circle of venture capitalists and board members. His custom black tux fit him flawlessly, and the platinum cufflinks at his wrists glimmered beneath the chandeliers. But it wasn't Nathan's presence that caught Vivienne off guard. It was the woman beside him. Bianca Lawrence, dressed in a crimson gown that hugged her curves, leaned into Nathan's shoulder. Her laughter rang a little too loudly, her cherry-red lips curled into a coy smile as she placed a manicured hand on his arm like she'd claimed him. She radiated confidence, the kind that came from knowing she had won. Bianca wasn't just another woman, she was the one Nathan had left Vivienne for. And she didn't try to hide it. Vivienne's grip on her clutch tightened as she observed them, but she refused to let the envy consume her. The sting of being replaced, of watching the man she'd invested years in swap stability for a momentary thrill, burned quietly. But she wouldn't let them see it. Tonight wasn't about Nathan or Bianca. It was about her. A server approached with a tray of champagne, and Vivienne took a glass, more to occupy her hands than to drink the contents. The cold champagne slid down her throat, but it did little to calm the knot of tension coiling in her stomach. Vivienne scanned the room, mentally bracing herself to navigate the ocean of socialites and entrepreneurs who thrived on whispered scandals. If she played her cards right tonight, she wouldn't just be remembered as the woman who was left behind. She'd be remembered as a woman in command of her own story. With a soft smile and poised demeanor, she glided through the crowd, exchanging courteous nods and greetings. Her thoughts briefly drifted to her conversation with her best friend, Julia, earlier that afternoon. "You don't owe him anything," Julia had said, her voice firm but kind. "But if you want to remind him of what he gave up, do it for you. Not for him. Not for revenge." Those words echoed in Vivienne's mind now, anchoring her as she approached the first cluster of donors standing near the stage. They were deep in discussion about the city's Youth Tech Education Fund, a cause close to Vivienne's heart, one she had invested months into. Her passion for the initiative was genuine, rooted in her own upbringing in a modest Detroit neighborhood where public schools were often overlooked. But tonight she would let that passion serve a dual purpose. Mrs. Langston, one of the donors, greeted warmly, offering a hand. "It's so good to see you again." Vivienne returned the smile as she slipped effortlessly into the group's conversation. "You too. I'm really looking forward to the auction tonight. These proceeds could truly transform opportunities for our city's schools. Within minutes, she had the entire group's attention, her in-depth knowledge of the program and heartfelt enthusiasm quickly drawing them in. She wasn't just a beautiful figure once tethered to Nathan Devereux. Not tonight. Tonight, she was a force in her own right. The more she spoke, the more her confidence grew, piece by piece. And as her voice wove through the conversation, she could feel the atmosphere shift, the room's gaze subtly beginning to turn toward her. Across the ballroom, Nathan's attention was drawn. Their eyes locked for a brief instant. His smile faded slightly. His laughter faltered as he took in the vision before him. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Surprise, maybe even regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Bianca leaned in, murmuring something into his ear, reclaiming his attention. But Vivian had already turned away. She continued moving with purpose, shaking hands with philanthropists, business leaders, and board members. Every gesture was intentional. Every smile measured. She wasn't simply there to reclaim attention. She was there to cultivate relationships that would extend beyond the glittering walls of this one evening. With every meaningful exchange, her vision grew clearer. She didn't need Nathan to succeed. She never had. As the evening neared its auction phase, Vivian quietly stepped away from the crowd and slipped into a private room tucked behind the ballroom. Waiting for her, there was the event director, a man she'd worked alongside for months to prepare for this night. He handed her a sleek folder containing the final paperwork for a significant pledge she was making. It was a calculated decision, one that would not only impact lives, but also firmly establish her standing in the city's philanthropic circles. And firmly mark her as a key figure in her own right, completely independent of her former husband. Vivian signed the paperwork with a steady hand, her heart racing, not from nerves, but from the rush of finally taking charge. As she re-entered the ballroom, something within her had shifted. There was a new energy, a sense of authority she hadn't felt in years. When the auction's final bid was announced and Vivian Devereux's name echoed across the room, the applause was thunderous. For the first time in what felt like forever, she stood alone in the spotlight, and she didn't have to share it. As she acknowledged the crowd's admiration, her gaze drifted toward Nathan. His face was unreadable, but his posture had changed. He no longer carried the nonchalant arrogance of a man who believed the world bent to his will. And Bianca's confident smile? It faltered, her eyes darting between Vivian and Nathan, visibly shaken by the shift in power. When the applause finally faded, Vivian returned to her seat, a small, satisfied smile tugging at her lips. This night wasn't about humiliating Nathan or outshining Bianca. It was about remembering who she was, a woman of grace, fortitude, and resilience. As the gala wound down, Vivian stood by the grand entrance, watching guests trickle into the chilly evening air. She didn't look for Nathan. She didn't need to. Her path was hers now, and this moment was just the beginning. If you had been in Vivian's shoes, would you have done the same? Or chosen another route? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe. The best is still to come. The towering Devereux estate was wrapped in a familiar silence, one that had come to feel more haunting than peaceful to Vivian. The sweeping staircase, the massive chandelier, and the art-covered walls all spoke of luxury she once believed would equal happiness. Now they felt hollow, like remnants of a life she had slowly outgrown. She moved quietly through the dim corridor, her heels clicking against the marble floor, echoing through a space that resembled more a museum than a home. In her bedroom, once her sanctuary on lonely nights while Nathan hosted clients or, more recently, entertained Bianca, everything was pristine. And yet, the king-sized bed always felt too wide for just one person. Setting her clutch down on the nightstand, she slipped out of her gown and into a sleek silk robe. Her eyes caught her reflection in the vanity mirror, and she paused, studying the woman who stared back at her. "You're stronger than this," she whispered. A buzz broke the quiet. Her phone lit up with Julia's name. Vivian smiled softly, answering the call and easing down onto the edge of the bed. "I was wondering when you'd call," Vivian said, her voice gentler now. "You think I'd miss hearing how it went?" Julia's familiar warmth poured through the line like a balm to Vivian's soul. "Tell me everything. Did you see him? I did, Vivian replied, her voice calm. A pause lingered on the other end. The weight of that admission settled in. How bad was it? Julia asked softly. Not as bad as I thought it would be, Vivian replied, her fingers absent-mindedly gliding over the textured stitching of the comforter. I thought I'd feel angry or embarrassed, but I didn't. Watching them together, it just made me realize how far I've come. Julia let out a gentle sigh. You've been through hell, Viv. I'm proud of you for going tonight. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Vivian said, leaning back against the headboard, her voice steady. But it was necessary. I needed to remind myself that I'm not just his ex-wife. And tonight, I think I finally did. There was a pause on the other end. When Julia spoke again, her tone had shifted to something more serious. So what now? You're not just gonna let him walk away with everything, are you? Vivian closed her eyes, letting the question settle. For months she had hovered on the edge of indecision, unsure whether to fight for what she'd helped build or walk away quietly. But something changed tonight. Standing in that ballroom, commanding attention and admiration, had reawakened a version of herself she had almost forgotten, one unafraid of taking bold steps. I've been thinking about it, she said finally, her voice calm, and I know what I need to do. Julia's curiosity rose. Do you have a plan? Not yet, Vivian admitted, but I have an idea, and I know where to start. Her gaze shifted across the room to the polished walnut bookshelf, where a neatly aligned row of business books and old project binders collected dust. She had spent years in Nathan's shadow, attending strategy meetings, taking diligent notes, absorbing everything he said. She never imagined she'd actually use any of it. But now, that knowledge felt like power. Power she was finally ready to wield. I'll need help, she continued, her mind already racing. But I know people. Some of Nathan's former colleagues left the company on bad terms. If I talk to the right ones, they might be willing to open up. You're going after the Horizon District project, aren't you? Julia asked, her voice a blend of awe and caution. It's his biggest venture, Vivian confirmed, her grip tightening slightly around her phone. He's poured millions into it, but he's overextended. If I can target the right areas, control certain assets, I might be able to shift the power dynamic. Julia hesitated. Are you sure? This won't just be about business. It's going to get complicated. I know, Vivian said without flinching. But this isn't about revenge. This is about reclaiming my life. I can't keep sitting back, watching him thrive while I'm left cleaning up the pieces. I need to do this. For me. There was a brief silence before Julia exhaled. Then I'm in. Whatever you need, I've got your back. Thank you, Vivian said, her voice softening. I'll keep you posted. After the call ended, Vivian rose from the bed and walked to the bookshelf. Her fingers ran along the spines of titles she had once helped Nathan reference on late nights and business trips. Found what she was looking for. A binder filled with notes from the many meetings she had quietly attended over the years with Nathan. As Vivian flipped through the pages, memories resurfaced. Long nights spent beside him, watching him strategize, negotiate, and win. He had been brilliant once, before his ambition twisted into unchecked greed. Then one entry caught her eye. A project overview for a luxury condo development in the heart of downtown Chicago. It had been Nathan's most daring venture yet, also his most fragile. The land acquisition process had been a nightmare. Permit approvals had dragged on for months, and the construction costs? Explosive. If there was a crack in his empire, this was it. The next morning, Vivian sat at her kitchen island, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She had already compiled a list of names, developers, former employees, and a few industry insiders who might have useful insight. One name stood out. Daniel Reese, a former project manager who had worked closely with Nathan until a disagreement led to his abrupt resignation. Daniel had always been kind to Vivian, often confiding in her when the pressure from Nathan became unbearable. Without giving herself a chance to overthink, Vivian composed a message. Hi Daniel, it's Vivian Devereux. I hope you're doing well. I'd love to meet and catch up. There's something important I'd like to discuss if you have time this week. She hit send and set the phone down, her heart thudding. It was just a small step, but the first one. And for now, that was enough. Later that afternoon, while sifting through archived folders in her home office, her phone buzzed. Daniel had responded. He agreed to meet for lunch the next day. Relief washed over her, but it was soon replaced by resolve. If she was going to challenge Nathan, she'd have to be exact, strategic, unwavering. The following day, Vivian arrived at a quaint cafe tucked in a quiet side street. It had exposed wooden beams and the warm scent of fresh bread in the air. She spotted Daniel seated by the window, a laptop open in front of him. He looked up as she walked in, a smile spreading across his face. "Vivian?" he greeted, rising to his feet. "It's been way too long." "Far too long," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. They exchanged brief pleasantries, but Vivian wasted no time. Her tone shifted. "Daniel, I need your help," she said. "I know you left Nathan's firm under tough circumstances, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm hoping you'll tell me what really went wrong with the Horizon District project." Daniel's expression shifted, part curiosity, part caution. "Why do you want to know?" "Because," Vivian replied, her gaze unwavering, "I'm planning to take it from him." Daniel leaned back, looking at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "If anyone can do it, it's you. I'll tell you everything." And then, he began. Vulnerabilities, the ballooning costs, the chronic delays, and the increasingly restless investors. For the first time in months, Vivian felt a surge of power rise inside her. She wasn't reacting anymore, she was leading. The future suddenly felt like something she could mold with her own hands. This wasn't just about taking Nathan down, it was about building something that belonged to her, something no one could ever take away. And this was only the beginning. The private rooftop terrace of Nathan Devereux's penthouse stretched high above the glittering city. The Chicago skyline sprawled endlessly beneath him, a sea of lights flickering like stars. The air was brisk but not biting, carrying the faint scent of the river and the steady hum of traffic far below. Nathan lounged back in one of the plush chairs, a glass of bourbon resting lazily in his hand. His tailored shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his face showing the residue of a day filled with back-to-back meetings, investment calls, and obligatory networking. But here, beneath the soft amber glow of the terrace lighting, he wasn't the visionary CEO. He was simply a man wrapped in luxury, indulging in the comfort he had always believed was rightfully his. Across from him, Bianca Lorentz adjusted the tie on her ruby-red silk robe, the fabric catching the light as she shifted. One leg crossed gracefully over the other, her long dark hair spilled down her back, and her crimson lips curled into a knowing smile. She spun the stem of her wineglass between her fingers, her gaze fixed on Nathan, half curious, half amused. "You seem tense tonight," Bianca said, her voice smooth and deliberate, as polished as the wine she sipped. Nathan let out a quiet chuckle, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Just the usual. Investors needing reassurance, contractors whining about deadlines, board members breathing down my neck, nothing I can't handle." Bianca smirked, tilting her head. "You always say that? But even you have limits, don't you?" He arched a brow, ego flaring just slightly. "I don't have limits, Bianca. I have setbacks. And setbacks, they can be managed." She leaned in, resting her chin on her palm. "You mean like the setbacks on the Horizon District project?" Nathan's jaw tightened subtly, but he masked it with another sip of bourbon. "Just temporary snags. The land acquisition took longer than expected. But I've got a meeting with the zoning commission next week. Once that's cleared, we're back on track." Bianca tapped her manicured nails against her glass, her expression unreadable. "Sounds like you're confident, but confidence only gets you so far. What if this project doesn't bounce back?" "It will," Nathan said, voice steely. "I've poured too much into it for it to fail." She leaned back again, that smirk still playing on her lips. "Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do, don't you?" Her tone was light, but the undertone didn't go unnoticed. Nathan studied her, narrowing his eyes. Bianca had always played the role of supporter, or at least she pretended to, but something in her demeanor tonight felt off, testing him. "Do you doubt me?" Nathan asked, setting his glass firmly on the glass-top table between them. Bianca shrugged, the silk of her robe slipping slightly off one shoulder, revealing just a glimpse more than intended. "I don't doubt you, Nathan. I just wonder how long you can keep juggling everything. The Horizon District project, the hotel revamp on Michigan Avenue, the commercial tech complex near Fulton Market, and now the fallout from the gala." Nathan's jaw tightened at the mention of the gala. He had done his best to downplay what had happened that night. But Vivian's unexpected reappearance and the way she had commanded the entire evening had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. Watching her take the stage, poised and gracious, accepting the applause like it had always been hers, it stung. That wasn't how things were supposed to play out. Vivian was supposed to disappear into the background, not rise into the spotlight. "The gala is over," Nathan said, his tone clipped and dismissive. "It doesn't matter." Bianca raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Doesn't it? She made quite the impression. People are still buzzing about her donation." "Let them talk," Nathan replied, leaning back into his seat. "It won't change anything." Bianca studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're underestimating her," she said. "I've seen women like Vivian before. They lay low until you forget they're there. And then," she snapped her fingers, "they strike. If I were you, I'd keep an eye on her." Nathan's expression darkened. "Vivian doesn't have the means to threaten me." Bianca let out a soft, silken laugh. "Maybe not financially, but you'd be surprised what people are capable of when they're underestimated." The comment irked him, but he kept it hidden. Instead, Nathan stood and walked to the edge of the terrace, his gaze sweeping over the glittering city below, a city he had helped shape with his developments, his vision. From this height, everything felt controlled, untouchable, as though the chaos of both his business and his personal life couldn't reach him up here. But Bianca's words clung to him like an itch beneath his skin. Vivian had always been the quiet force behind his success, offering advice when needed, supporting him without asking for credit. But something had changed. The woman who had stood under that chandelier, serene and self-assured, wasn't the same one who used to wait up for him at home, hoping he'd return from another late night at the office. She was different now, stronger, more assured, and that made her dangerous. Bianca stepped beside him, slipping her arm around his. "Relax, Nathan. I'm not saying she'll destroy you. I'm just saying, be careful." He let out a breath and turned toward her, forcing a smile. "I appreciate the concern, but I've got everything under control." "Of course you do," Bianca purred, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Just don't let your guard down." As the evening wore on, they returned to their lounge chairs, sipping their drinks, chatting about their upcoming trip to Monaco. But Nathan's thoughts were far from yachts and champagne. They were with Vivian, and the creeping realization that he might have made a grave mistake by underestimating her. The next morning, Nathan arrived at his downtown office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered an uninterrupted view of the busy Chicago streets below. His assistant handed him a stack of reports. At the top was a progress update on the Horizon District project. As he skimmed through the documents, his brow furrowed. The construction delays were worse than anticipated, and the cost overruns were starting to spiral. He made a mental note to connect with the project manager before the day ended. Before he could dig deeper into the reports, his phone buzzed. An email from one of his top investors had landed in his inbox, bluntly raising concerns about the project's profitability. Nathan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He despised appearing vulnerable, especially to those who had trusted him with their capital. But this time, the cracks weren't just forming, they were spreading. And fast. By lunchtime, Nathan sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room with his core executive team. Ideas were thrown around, some desperate, some pragmatic. "We could consider selling off a portion of the land to free up capital," one executive offered. Nathan shook his head immediately. "No, selling assets is the last resort. We're not there. Not yet." "Then we need to bring in new investors," another suggested. Nathan nodded reluctantly. The idea of sharing more control of the project didn't sit well with him. His entire career had been built on the principle of absolute control. But now, with pressure mounting and Bianca's warnings still echoing in his mind, he couldn't ignore the growing sense that he was starting to lose his grip. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Bianca greeted him with a kiss. But Nathan's demeanor was far from affectionate. He poured himself a drink and dropped onto the couch, staring out at the skyline that had once felt like his kingdom. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Doubt. And not just about the Horizon District, about Vivian. The morning light filtered gently through the tall bay windows of Vivian's home office, casting a golden hue over the dark wood of her mahogany desk. Once just a decorative space, it had now become the operational center of her entire plan. Stacks of documents, blueprints, and legal contracts were arranged with calculated purpose. Vivian moved among them with a quiet confidence, her hands gliding over paper as though this had always been her domain. The faint scent of fresh coffee and printer ink lingered in the air. The room was silent, except for the steady scratch of her pen moving across the page. She paused, tapping the pen lightly against her lips, eyes scanning the latest financial report on the Horizon District development. Nathan had poured everything into the project, and it showed. Escalating costs, missed deadlines, tense investor relations, the numbers were clear. This was the weakness she had been waiting for. A knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, straightening her posture. The door creaked open, and Daniel Reese stepped inside, a laptop bag slung casually over one shoulder. He was in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a worn leather jacket that hinted at a man who had weathered more than a few storms in the business world. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, swept across the room before settling on Vivian, who rose from her seat to greet him. "Thanks for coming, Daniel," she said, extending a hand. He shook it firmly. He sounded serious on the phone. Figured it was worth the trip. "It is," Vivian replied, motioning toward a chair. "I need your help navigating the mess Nathan's created with the Horizon District project." Daniel chuckled as he took a seat. "Mess is an understatement. I warned him about overextending, but Nathan never listens once he thinks he's right." He leaned in, resting his elbows on the desk. "So, what exactly are you planning to do?" Vivian's lips curled into a calm, confident smile. "I'm going to acquire the key assets tied to the project. The land parcels, supplier contracts, and development rights. Once I control those, Nathan won't be able to move forward without me." Daniel let out a low whistle, clearly impressed. "You've done your homework." "I've had plenty of time," Vivian replied coolly. "While Nathan was busy building his empire, I was paying attention." She handed him a folder, crisp, well-organized, packed with data, financial breakdowns, and strategy notes. "These are the critical pressure points. The land acquisition is the linchpin. Once we secure that, the rest will fall into place." Daniel flipped through the file, nodding as he scanned the details. "I know the guy who owns the adjacent parcel. We worked together on a mid-rise development a few years ago. If he's still in the same financial position, he might be open to selling, if the price is right." Vivian leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Then let's make him an offer he can't refuse." Daniel closed the folder and studied her for a long moment. "You've changed, Vivian. Last time I saw you, you were the quiet one in the background, taking notes while Nathan talked over everyone. Now you're leading the charge." Her smile remained, but there was unmistakable steel behind it. "I'm done being quiet." The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and negotiations. Vivian moved with precision, her mind operating like a finely tuned machine. She coordinated efforts with lawyers, developers, and financial advisors, building momentum with each passing hour. Every move was calculated. There was no room for hesitation. One misstep, and Nathan could catch wind of her plans. But this wasn't just about defense anymore. She was building something for herself, and she was doing it on her own terms. At night, when the house was silent and the city beyond her windows slept, Vivian would sit by her bedroom window, tablet in hand, reviewing contracts under the soft glow of the city lights. The ache of loneliness that once lingered had been replaced by a burning purpose. For years, she had stood behind Nathan, cheering him on, shelving her own ambitions for the sake of his. But now, the dream she was chasing was hers, and she wasn't letting go. Late that night, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel: "Land deal secured. Papers ready to sign." Vivian exhaled, a flood of relief and adrenaline rising in her chest. She quickly tapped out a reply, confirming the next steps, then set the phone aside and leaned back in her chair. It was happening. Every move she had planned was falling into place, and soon, Nathan would have no choice but to confront the reality of what she had done. The next morning, Vivian sat across from her attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Rachel, known across Chicago's corporate circles for dismantling even the most formidable opponents with nothing but contracts and calm logic. They were seated in a minimalist, high-rise conference room, the walls lined with shelves of thick legal volumes and framed degrees. Rachel spread out the final paperwork across the table, her crimson nails tapping rhythmically against the contract. "Once you sign this," she said, her voice precise, "you'll hold the majority stake in the development rights and core assets tied to the Horizon District. Nathan won't be able to move forward without your approval." Vivian nodded slowly, her fingers grazing the edge of the pen. Then, with deliberate strokes, she signed her name. Boldly, without hesitation. The weight of the moment settled around her, but instead of feeling heavy, it felt freeing. When she handed the signed documents back, Rachel gave a small approving nod. Vivian felt the surge again, that rush of confidence. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Nathan anymore. This was about reclaiming who she was. Later that afternoon, Vivian met Daniel at a cozy downtown cafe. The scent of fresh espresso drifted through the air, and the lively hum of conversation surrounded them. Daniel took a sip of his drink, his expression bright with admiration. "You pulled it off," he said, setting his cup down. "I've got to admit, I didn't think you'd move this fast." "I didn't have a choice," Vivian replied, gently stirring her tea. "Nathan doesn't leave vulnerabilities open for long. I had to strike while he was distracted." Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "What's next?" "Let him find out," Vivian said calmly. "I'm not hiding this. When he realizes I've taken control, he'll come to me, and when he does, I'll be ready." Daniel chuckled. "I'd pay to witness that conversation." Vivian smiled faintly, but her mind was already sprinting ahead, anticipating Nathan's reaction, preparing for the battles ahead. She knew he wouldn't go down quietly. His pride wouldn't allow it. But that was exactly what she was counting on. He still saw her as the woman he left behind. By the time he realized the truth, it would be too late. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm, amber glow across the city streets, Vivian walked briskly to her car. Her heels echoed against the pavement, sharp, deliberate, confident. The world felt different now. The air itself seemed to lean in her favor. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, and the taste of it? Absolutely intoxicating. When she arrived home, she stepped into the kitchen and she poured herself a glass of wine. The house was still, but the silence no longer felt like loneliness. For the first time in years, it felt like peace. Vivian had spent so long living in the shadow of someone else's ambition, but now she was the one casting the shadow. As she sipped her wine, a soft smile tugged at her lips. This was only the beginning. Across town, Nathan Devereux sat at the head of a long, polished conference table in his downtown office. His gaze was locked on the thick binder of reports spread out in front of him. Morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a stark glare across the room, illuminating every line of tension etched into his features. The confidence that usually cloaked him in boardrooms was gone, replaced by the creeping dread of a situation spiraling out of his control. His fingers drummed rhythmically on the tabletop, betraying the impatience pulsing just beneath the surface. He flipped through the latest construction update, scanning rows of numbers that seemed to darken with each new page. Shipping delays, permit setbacks, labor disputes. Everything that could possibly derail the Horizon District project was happening, and all at once. And the worst part? His investors were growing restless. Their last meeting had devolved into a storm of pointed questions and veiled threats. He didn't have answers, not ones that would satisfy them. "Mr. Devereux," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Donovan is here to see you." Nathan exhaled sharply, slamming the binder shut. "Send him in." Moments later, Richard Donovan, his CFO, stepped into the room, a laptop and thick folder tucked under his arm. The man looked just as strained as Nathan felt. His tie was loosened, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "I assume you've seen the latest figures," Donovan said, settling into the chair across from him. Nathan leaned back, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've seen them. What I need is a solution, something we can show the board before they start talking about replacing me." Donovan sighed and opened the folder, sliding a printed report across the table. "We've isolated the primary cost overruns. The materials sourced from the European supplier are stuck in customs, and the holding fees are stacking daily. Our subcontractors are demanding higher rates due to the ongoing labor shortage, and the zoning commission is dragging their heels on the revisions we submitted. Nathan's jaw clenched as he scanned the document. The problems read like a chain reaction, each delay triggering the next, each misstep snowballing into the mess they were now drowning in. Even his usual blend of charm and pressure wouldn't untangle this knot. "What about our investors?" he asked, his voice quiet but tight. "Are we in danger of losing any?" Donovan hesitated. The silence said more than words. "Richard," Nathan said, his tone sharper now, edged with the kind of warning that came from a man who refused to watch everything he built collapse. "Not in the mood for sugarcoating. Tell me." Donovan cleared his throat. "Two of our secondary investors have raised concerns. They're not pulling out yet, but they've started inquiring about exit strategies. If we don't show significant progress by next quarter," he added, "they may jump ship." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped tightly. The stakes had never been higher. The Horizon District wasn't just another development, it was his statement to the world. Proof that he could conquer obstacles and come out on top. But for the first time, that kind of victory felt far out of reach. "We need a new strategy," he said after a long silence. "I'm not losing this project." Donovan shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "What now?" "I didn't want to say anything until I confirmed the details, but the land parcel adjacent to the main site, someone else acquired it." Nathan's head snapped up. "What do you mean, someone else? I thought we had a deal." "We did," Donovan said carefully, "but the seller accepted another offer before we could close. The paperwork went through 2 weeks ago." Nathan shoved back from the table, the chair scraping sharply against the floor as he stood. "Who outbid us?" he demanded. Donovan hesitated before locking eyes with him. "Vivian Devereaux." For a second, the name didn't compute, like his mind refused to believe it. But when it registered, a rush of disbelief and rage surged through him. He paced to the window, staring out at the skyline. His wife, the woman he'd once dismissed as graceful but inconsequential, quiet, predictable, a background figure in his spotlight. She had just outmaneuvered him. "When did this happen?" Nathan asked, voice low and dangerously calm. 2 weeks ago," Donovan repeated. "She's been moving quietly, acquiring assets linked to the project. The land isn't the only thing. She's secured one of our key supplier contracts and a stake in the development rights." Nathan's hands gripped the edge of the window frame until his knuckles whitened. He had underestimated her, clearly. But how had she orchestrated all this under his radar? "I want everything," Nathan said, turning sharply. "Who she's working with, how she's financing this, and what her endgame is." Donovan nodded, gathering his files. "I'll have a full report on your desk by tomorrow." As the door shut behind him, Nathan collapsed back into his chair, fingers raking through his hair. His thoughts spiraled, searching for sense in what felt like betrayal cloaked in brilliance. Vivian had never outwardly expressed interest in business, at least not that he'd noticed. But now, she wasn't just stepping into his world. She was reshaping it. And she wasn't playing by his rules. For years, he'd seen her as a companion to his legacy, the poised partner who smiled at galas, stayed behind the scenes, and supported him in silence. But that image had crumbled. Now she was something else entirely. She clearly had her own ambitions. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking through his thoughts. A message from Bianca. "Dinner tonight? Let's unwind." He didn't reply. His mind was still firmly locked on Vivian. This wasn't just a business complication. It was personal. She had made sure of that, and now he had to find a way to counter her, without letting emotion cloud his judgment. That evening, Nathan sat alone in his penthouse. The glow of the city lights poured through the windows, casting a warm haze across the room. The glass of bourbon rested untouched in his hand. Television played silently in the background, completely forgotten. His mind held on to one question. What was Vivian's next move? He pulled up her contact on his phone, thumb hovering above the call button. A part of him wanted to confront her, demand answers, but another part knew better. Calling her now, in the heat of his frustration, would be a mistake. Vivian had always been composed under pressure. If he revealed even a crack, she'd use it. So instead he lowered the phone and leaned back into the couch, eyes tracing the ceiling. He had to think like her now, anticipate her next play, beat her to it. If he didn't act soon, she would tighten her grip on the Horizon District. And she wouldn't let go. One thing had become crystal clear. Vivian wasn't the woman he had once married. She had changed, and if he didn't adapt, she'd win. But Nathan Devereux wasn't known for losing. The heavy oak doors of the Devereux estate groaned open. Vivian stood poised in the grand foyer, her silhouette bathed in the soft gold of the setting sun. She had been expecting this moment, ever since the sharp knock shattered her quiet afternoon. And just as she'd predicted, Nathan had arrived, frustrated, impulsive, and ready for a confrontation. She wore a navy blue sheath dress that skimmed her figure with elegance and quiet authority. Every detail of her appearance had been chosen with care. She wanted to project one thing: control. Nathan strode in without waiting for permission. The door slammed shut behind him with finality. He was still in his work attire, a charcoal suit with the top button of his shirt undone and his tie slightly loosened. But the usual calm control he carried into every meeting room was absent. What radiated off him now was tension. His jaw clenched, his eyes flared with anger as they locked onto her own, cool and composed. "We need to talk," he said, voice low and clipped. Vivian tilted her head slightly, like someone mildly amused. "I figured you'd show up eventually." He let out a bitter chuckle, dragging a hand through his hair. "You think this is funny, Vivian? I just found out you've been buying up assets connected to the Horizon District, behind my back. What the hell are you doing?" She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she turned and walked slowly toward the living room, her posture relaxed, graceful, completely in control. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she walked. Nathan followed, his own footsteps heavier, each one echoing the weight of rising fury. Vivian motioned for him to sit, but he remained standing, looming above her like a storm about to break loose. She settled into a plush leather armchair, crossing one leg over the other, her hands resting delicately on her lap. "I'm doing what any smart businesswoman would do, Nathan," she said evenly. "I saw an opportunity, and I seized it." Nathan scoffed, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "This isn't just business, and you know it. You're doing this to get back at me." Vivian raised an eyebrow, utterly composed. "Are you really so self-absorbed that you think everything I do is about you?" "Don't play games with me," he snapped, stopping directly in front of her. "You've been quietly dismantling my project piece by piece, and now you control the entire board. You could have taken the divorce settlement and disappeared. Instead, you've come after my company." She leaned forward, her voice soft, but edged with iron. "I didn't come after your company, Nathan. I went after what I deserve." He stared at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes as he tried to reconcile the woman in front of him with the one he thought he knew. For years, Vivian had been the quiet presence in his life, the elegant partner at dinners, the silent supporter who never asked for credit. But the woman before him now? She was a strategist, a tactician, and she'd been playing this game longer than he realized. "Why now?" he asked, his voice no longer accusatory, but curious. "Why go through all this?" Vivian exhaled, leaning back into the chair. "Because I spent years watching you build your empire while you treated me like a prop. I put everything on hold because I believed we were partners. But I was wrong. The moment someone younger, flashier came along, you discarded me." Her words landed like a blow. Nathan flinched, caught off guard by the cool finality in her voice. He had expected rage, maybe even desperation, but not this. Cold, calculated justice. "You could have asked for more in the divorce," he muttered. Vivian let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money." She looked him square in the eye. "It's about power. You taught me that, whether you meant to or not. I'm not here to destroy you, Nathan. I'm here to take back what you stole from me. My identity, my confidence, my future." For a beat, the room fell into silence. Only the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock filled the space between them. Nathan stood still, his mind reeling with memories, the missed signals, the late nights, the unspoken resentments. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying for it. "So what's your plan?" he asked finally, his voice subdued. "Are you going to hold the project hostage until I fold?" Vivian gave a faint smile. There was no bitterness in it, only certainty. "I don't need to hold it hostage," Vivian said smoothly. "I own the majority of the development rights. The key suppliers are under contract with me, and the investors trust my vision more than they trust yours. She met his gaze, steady and calm. I'm not here to negotiate, I'm here to lead. Nathan sank into the couch across from her, the weight of the moment settling over him like a lead blanket. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. His entire identity had been built around control, commanding every room, directing every outcome. But Vivian had taken that control, and she had done it with elegance. You're serious, he muttered, mostly to himself. I am, she said simply. But I'm not here to destroy you, Nathan. I could have, but that's not what I want. This was never about revenge. It's about reclaiming what's mine. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. And what do you want from me now? Vivian stood, smoothing the fabric of her dress as she walked toward the tall window. She gazed out at the skyline, the city glowing like a constellation of opportunity. I want you to understand, she said softly, that I'm no longer the woman who stood quietly beside you, waiting for your recognition. I've built something of my own now, and you'll have to live with that. She turned back to face him, her eyes unflinching. You can either fight me and lose, or accept that the world doesn't revolve around you anymore. The choice is yours. Nathan stood, adjusting his tie as her words sank in. Part of him wanted to argue, to grasp at some final upper hand, but deep down, he knew. She had already won, and there was no shortcut out of this. As he walked toward the door, he paused, glancing back one last time. You've changed, Vivian. She smiled, a genuine smile, tinged with both sorrow and victory. I had to. Without another word, Nathan opened the door and stepped out into the night, the weight of his defeat pressing against his shoulders. Vivian stood still, heart pounding as the door clicked shut behind him. This moment, the one she had imagined over and over, had arrived, the culmination of months of meticulous strategy. But as silence filled the space he had left behind, she realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, a new chapter, one where she held the reins. She poured herself a glass of wine and sank into the same chair Nathan had just occupied. For the first time in years, she felt free. And for the first time in his life, Nathan Devereux understood what it meant to lose. The soft hum of office lights filled the air, casting a sterile glow across the otherwise dim space. Nathan sat behind his desk, the once imposing oak surface now cluttered with open folders, scribbled notes, and half-drunk cups of coffee. His sleeves were rolled up, the fine fabric wrinkled and forgotten, much like the man wearing it. The air was thick, tinged with the scent of stale bourbon from the untouched glass beside him. The digital clock on the wall blinked, 2:45 a.m. But Nathan's mind was far too restless for sleep. He sat in the dim glow of his office, scrolling through report after report on his laptop. The numbers blurred together: losses, budget overruns, investor concerns. The Horizon District project was a ticking time bomb, and he could hear every second of it counting down in his head. And Vivian's name? It was everywhere. In the contracts, in the supplier deals, in the development rights she now owned. She had surrounded him, boxed him in, and left him with almost no room to breathe, let alone maneuver. It was a trap, and he'd walked right into it. Nathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply as he rubbed his face with both hands. The ache in his chest wasn't just about the financial crisis. It was the stunning realization that the woman he had once written off as harmless had brought him to his knees, with precision and grace. His phone buzzed, cutting through the quiet. He glanced at the screen. Bianca. He hesitated before answering, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. Bianca? Nathan, where are you? Her voice was soft, but the irritation underneath was impossible to miss. I thought we had dinner plans. He pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm at the office. I forgot. There was a pause. You've been forgetting a lot lately, he sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Bianca, I don't have time for this right now. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her tone had chilled. You don't have time for anything that isn't business. Maybe that's why everything's falling apart. Her words struck deeper than he expected, or maybe they landed exactly where she intended. His jaw tensed. I'm not losing control, he snapped. Really? Bianca's laugh was short, bitter. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're drowning. Your investors are pulling back, your project's imploding, and your ex-wife, she's outmaneuvering you at every turn. "Enough," he shouted, slamming his hand against the desk. The sound reverberated through the office, but the storm inside him raged on. There was silence on the other end. Then her voice returned, quieter, more tired. "I'm trying to help you, Nathan, but you won't let anyone in." "I don't need help," he replied, but the words rang hollow, even to him. "Suit yourself," Bianca said. Her voice was flat now. "Just don't expect me to stand by and watch you destroy yourself." The call ended abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan stared at the phone in his hand, her final words echoing louder than anything else. She was right. He was drowning, but admitting it felt too much like surrender. And surrender had never been in his nature. The following morning, Nathan arrived at the construction site of the Horizon District project, searching for something, anything, that resembled control. The crisp air carried the scent of fresh concrete and sawdust. Around him, workers in hard hats moved in organized chaos. The voices of workers blended with the mechanical hum of bulldozers and cranes. But even here, where the physical form of his ambition should have brought comfort, Nathan felt like a stranger on his own project. He met with the site manager, Greg, a broad-shouldered man with years of construction grit under his nails. Greg had overseen several of Nathan's past developments, but this time his face was tight with concern. As they walked the uneven pathways of the site, Greg pointed out the missed milestones and unfinished segments. "We're hemorrhaging money," Greg said, wiping sweat from his brow. "If those materials don't get delivered by next week, we're staring down another month of delays." Nathan's mind was racing, but his expression stayed composed. "What about the supplier?" Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Under new management," he muttered. "Vivian Devereux, to be exact. She's renegotiating the contracts, and from what I'm hearing, she's in no rush to prioritize us." Nathan's stomach turned. He knew exactly what Vivian was doing. Delaying shipments was a power play, a precise move to squeeze him into submission, back him into a corner until the only options were concession or collapse. And the worst part? There wasn't a single legal crack in her armor. She had done everything by the book. Back in his car, Nathan sat motionless, hands clenched tightly around the steering wheel, his knuckles drained of color. The pressure in his chest expanded, failure pressing down on him like a crushing weight. He had always seen himself as the fixer, the one with answers. But this problem wasn't just a financial crisis. It was personal. Vivian had made sure of that. By evening, Nathan returned to his penthouse. The city lights glittered across the skyline, but what once felt like a symbol of his empire now mocked him. Each shimmering tower, each glowing window, reminders of what he was on the brink of losing. He poured himself another bourbon. The amber swirl mirrored the storm in his mind. Then the doorbell rang. A sharp chime cut through the silence. He set his glass down and crossed the floor. When he opened the door, he was surprised to find Bianca standing there. Her face unreadable. She wore a fitted black coat, and her hair fell over her shoulders like a curtain of ink. "I thought you were done with me," Nathan said, leaning against the doorframe. "I should be," she replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "But I'm not." He closed the door and followed her to the living room. She slid off her coat and draped it over the back of a chair with casual precision. "You look like hell," she said, eyeing him with a mix of concern and controlled irritation. "Thanks for the honesty," he muttered, sinking onto the couch. Bianca sat across from him, legs crossed elegantly. "You need to face reality, Nathan. You can't keep pretending this will fix itself." He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long, exhausted sigh. "I know," Bianca said, her voice softening, and for the first time in weeks, Nathan saw a glimmer of the woman who once believed in him. "Then do something about it," she added. "Talk to Vivian. Find a way to negotiate, even if it means swallowing your pride." Nathan stared at her. The idea of going to Vivian, humbling himself in front of her, felt both humiliating and inevitable. He had spent so long building walls, shielding himself from vulnerability. But now, with his empire teetering on collapse, he had no choice but to confront the one person who could either save him or bury him. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. Bianca gave him a faint smile as she stood and reached for her coat. "I'm always right. You just never listen." As she walked out, Nathan remained on the couch, her words lingering in the air like smoke. He knew what needed to be done. But would Vivian even be willing to hear him out? Or was this simply the final chapter in a long overdue lesson about losing everything he thought he had under control? The air in the sleek boardroom crackled with anticipation, the kind that hangs right before a thunderstorm. Glass-paneled walls framed by dark mahogany created an atmosphere of both power and pressure. Every sound was amplified. The echo of heels on marble, the shuffle of papers, the soft tapping of pens against leather-bound notebooks. Seated around the long, polished table were executives and stakeholders, each a representative of Nathan Devereux's sprawling enterprise. But today's meeting wasn't about quarterly reports or growth forecasts. It was about reckoning. At the head of the table sat Vivian Devereux, a vision of poise and control. Her navy blazer and crisp white blouse fit with precise elegance, projecting sharp professionalism. The delicate gold necklace at her collarbone was the only ornamentation. Grace paired seamlessly with strength. She was calm, unshaken, but her eyes, focused, unwavering, commanded the room with more force than any raised voice ever could. She had prepared for this moment down to the smallest detail. Then, the soft creak of the door broke the silence. All heads turned. Nathan Devereux entered. His presence, once synonymous with dominance, now brought tension. Though his charcoal suit was expertly tailored, his posture gave him away. There was strain at his shoulders, a weight behind his step. His gaze swept across the room, lingering on Vivian just a moment longer than it should have. She didn't flinch. She met his eyes with the calm certainty of someone who had already won. Nathan took the seat at the opposite end of the table, placing his leather briefcase on the table with a thud, too loud, too forceful. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. The mic in front of him picked it up. Several board members exchanged subtle glances. Vivian cleared her throat, a quiet sound but one that immediately recentered every gaze on her. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice smooth and commanding. "I know you've all been briefed on today's agenda," Vivian began, her voice calm and commanding. "But before we move forward, I'd like to address the future of Devereux Development Group." The phrase hit the room like a silent detonation. Tension thickened instantly, every eye locked on her. At the other end of the table, Nathan's fingers curled around the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. He braced for the blow he could feel coming. "As many of you are aware," Vivian continued, "over the past several months, I've been acquiring strategic assets tied to the Horizon District project. I now hold a controlling interest in the development rights, key supplier contracts, and the adjacent land parcel critical to the expansion phase." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, executives exchanging glances, whispering beneath their breaths. Nathan said nothing. His jaw was clenched, his expression tight as he fought to keep control. Vivian picked up the conference room remote and clicked it. The screen behind her flickered to life, revealing the first slide of a sharp, data-driven presentation. It showed a detailed financial breakdown of the project, highlighting every delay, every budget overrun, and every indicator of declining investor confidence. Every piece of data meticulously backed by hard evidence. "As you can see," she said, gesturing toward the screen, "this project has encountered significant challenges. But with the right leadership and strategic realignment, there's still a viable and profitable path forward." Nathan couldn't hold his tongue any longer. "Leadership?" His voice sliced through the room. "You think you can just walk in here and take over? This is my project, Vivian." She didn't blink. "Correction," she replied smoothly. "It was your project, now it's mine." A thick silence fell over the room. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning system. Nathan leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, eyes locked onto hers. "You think you've won just because you've boxed me in?" he said through clenched teeth. "You have no idea what it takes to manage a development of this scale. You're out of your depth." Vivian smiled, but not the warm smile he remembered. This was sharper, precise. "I think you're forgetting something, Nathan. I spent years sitting in on those meetings, listening to you strategize, negotiate, and execute. I took notes, I watched, and I waited." She leaned slightly forward. "This isn't me floundering. This is me finally stepping into the role I've been prepared for all along. You just never bothered to notice." The board members shifted in their chairs, the discomfort of witnessing something deeply personal mixing with a fascination too strong to ignore. Nathan let out a sharp breath and ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. "So what's your endgame, Vivian? To humiliate me? Tear down everything I built?" "No," she said simply. "I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here to fix what you broke." Her voice was firm but even. "The investors no longer trust you. They've seen the missed deadlines, the ballooning costs, and your failure to deliver solutions. They want leadership that can produce results." She paused, letting the words land. "That's why they've agreed to support my leadership." Nathan's gaze swept across the room, searching for any flicker of allegiance, any support. But all he saw were averted eyes, lowered heads, silence. Hesitant expressions met his gaze, if they met it at all. Even those Nathan had once considered loyal allies were now avoiding eye contact. Their silence spoke volumes. For the first time in his career, Nathan realized the truth. The foundation beneath him had already crumbled. Vivian continued, her voice unwavering. "Effective immediately, I will be assuming the role of lead developer for the Horizon District project." She paused only briefly before continuing. "My team has prepared a revised timeline and budget, which we will present following this meeting. Our immediate goal is to stabilize the project, restore investor confidence, and ensure we meet the projected completion date." Nathan felt like the wind had been knocked from his lungs. He'd expected resistance, a battle, but not like this. Not a silent, unanimous shift of power, not the board aligning so quietly behind her. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What could he possibly say? She had outmaneuvered him at every turn, and this was the final blow. As the meeting concluded, Vivian stood, gathering her documents with graceful precision. She turned to the board, offering a poised smile. "Thank you all for your time and continued support. I look forward to working with each of you." One by one, the executives filtered out, murmuring quiet farewells, offering uncertain glances in Nathan's direction. He didn't move. He stared at the table, as if the grain of the wood might offer some answer, some dignity, some last-minute solution. When the room had nearly emptied, Vivian approached him. Her heels made soft, certain clicks across the floor. "This doesn't have to be the end for you, Nathan," she said gently. "You're still a brilliant businessman, but maybe it's time you understand, success isn't about controlling everything." She paused. "It's about knowing when to adapt." He looked up at her, eyes clouded with a storm of anger, confusion, and something quieter. "Regret. Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She seemed to consider her words carefully. "Because I need to prove to myself that I can," she said. "And maybe you need to see it too." She didn't wait for a response. Vivian turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving him alone in the aftermath. Morning light crept through the curtains of Nathan Devereux's penthouse, casting soft beams across the hardwood floor. The silence in the room was heavy. Only the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of a bird outside the window broke it. Nathan lay on the leather couch, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled. An empty glass sat on the coffee table next to a nearly drained bottle of bourbon, the remnants of a sleepless night. The board meeting had been 2 days ago, but it replayed in his mind like a film stuck on repeat. Every word, every glance, every truth. Vivian's calm, deliberate dismantling of his power, the board's quiet agreement, the stark realization that his empire, his life's work, was no longer his to command. He had built it from the ground up, believing that grit and vision would be enough to hold it all together. But grit wasn't enough. And Vivian? She had done what he never saw coming, from failure, but now he was watching everything slip through his fingers. And the worst part? Vivian had orchestrated every step of his downfall. A knock at the door jolted him out of his thoughts. Nathan sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes before dragging a hand through his unruly hair. The knocking persisted, louder now, more insistent. Whoever it was had no intention of leaving quietly. With a low groan, he pushed himself off the couch and shuffled to the door. He didn't bother to check who it was. He was too tired to care. When he opened it, he was stunned to see her. Vivian. She stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored beige coat that hugged her frame with effortless elegance. Her hair was neatly pinned back, and the soft scent of jasmine floated in with her as she stepped past him, uninvited but confident. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she scanned the room. "You've certainly seen better days," she said, glancing at the disheveled living room and the half-empty bourbon bottle on the table. Nathan closed the door behind her and leaned against it, watching her with a complex mix of exhaustion and intrigue. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Haven't you done enough?" Vivian turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to gloat," she said. "Then why are you here?" His voice was bitter, but there was a rawness beneath it, a flicker of something unguarded. Vivian sighed, crossing her arms. "Because I wanted to give you a chance." He blinked. "I know what it feels like, when everything around you starts to fall apart," she continued. "I've been there, Nathan. Remember? But I also know you're not the kind of man who gives up easily." He scoffed and moved back to the couch, sinking into it with a weight that seemed to pull the air out of the room. "You've done a great job proving otherwise." Vivian walked over and sat in the armchair across from him. Her posture was upright, but there was no stiffness, only clarity. "I didn't do this to destroy you," she said. "I did it to reclaim my life. There's a difference." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his hands together. "And now that you've taken everything, what am I supposed to do? Start over from scratch?" "No," she replied gently. "I expect you to adapt." He looked up at her. The word hung in the air. Adapt. It wasn't something he was used to. His success had come from sheer will, from never bending, never shifting. But now that strategy had failed him, and the idea of change, real change, felt terrifying and necessary. "Vivian," he said quietly, after a long silence, "how did you do it? How did you go from the woman who sat in the background to this?" She smiled faintly, her gaze softening. "It wasn't easy," she said. "There were nights I doubted everything, days I wanted to quit, but every time I thought I couldn't do it, I reminded myself." Her voice faltered for just a moment, then steadied again. "I reminded myself of all the years I spent supporting your dreams while forgetting my own. Realize that if I could help you build an empire, then I could build something for myself." Nathan swallowed hard, the guilt settling in his chest like a stone dropped into deep water. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," Vivian said gently, "but intention doesn't erase impact." They sat in silence, and for the first time the tension that had clung to the space between them seemed to loosen, lifted by words that had waited too long to be spoken. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but inside the penthouse time seemed to pause. "What happens now?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Vivian studied him for a long moment before responding. "That depends on you." He looked up, surprised as she continued. "I have no intention of shutting you out of the project completely. If you're willing to work with me, we can turn this around, together." "You're serious?" he asked, blinking. "Completely," she replied. "But there are conditions." "Of course there are," he muttered, leaning back. "What are they?" "For starters," she said, "you'll have to let go of the need to control everything. This isn't just your project anymore. It's ours. If you can accept that, we can make it work." Nathan let the words settle. Sharing control wasn't a familiar concept to him. But strangely, it didn't sound as threatening as it once had. "And the second condition?" he asked. Vivian smiled. But this time, it wasn't the smile of a businesswoman executing a strategy. It was the smile of the woman he had once loved, the woman he had taken for granted. "You have to acknowledge that I'm not the same woman you left behind. I'm not here to be your sidekick or support system. I'm your equal. And if you can't accept that, then there's no partnership." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling deep into him. "I understand. Do you?" she asked, her gaze steady. "Because if you don't, this conversation ends here." "I do," he said, firmer now. "I understand." Vivian stood, smoothing her coat as she prepared to leave. "Good. Then we'll talk more at the next meeting. For now, get some rest. You'll need it." Nathan stood too, watching her walk toward the door. "Vivian?" She paused, turning slightly. "Yes? Thank you." The words carried a depth he hadn't tapped into in years. She nodded, offering him one final smile before stepping into the hallway. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. And for the first time in weeks, Nathan didn't feel trapped. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh blooms, mingling with the distant hum of the waking city. Vivienne Devereux stood atop the rooftop of her newly acquired office building, her eyes on the horizon, where the sunlight kissed the skyline of downtown Chicago. The view was breathtaking. But it wasn't the skyline that filled Vivienne with pride. It was the journey that had brought her here. The rooftop garden, with its neatly manicured greenery and polished stone pathways, had been designed as a symbol of growth and renewal. Much like Vivienne herself. Dressed in a fitted cream blazer and tailored pants, she exuded a quiet confidence. Her heels clicked softly on the stone as she made her way to a wooden bench nestled among blooming lavender. In her hand was a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with sketches, ideas, and bold plans for the next phase of her life. She sat, the sunlight warming her face, and opened the notebook to a fresh page. Her pen hovered for a moment, then moved fluidly, ink flowing in time with her thoughts. This wasn't just a to-do list. It was a declaration of intent. Vivienne had reclaimed her power, but now she wanted something greater. She wanted to leave a legacy, something that would outlast the trials she had endured. Something that mattered. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Caroline, her best friend and fiercest confidante, making her way across the rooftop, dressed in jeans and a light jacket. She held 2 steaming cups of coffee, her warm smile radiating comfort. "Figured you could use a caffeine boost," Caroline said, handing her one of the cups before taking a seat beside her. "You know me too well," Vivienne replied with a grateful smile. She took a sip, the rich warmth grounding her, a reminder of life's simple pleasures she had learned to cherish. Caroline's gaze dropped to the open notebook in Vivienne's lap. "More plans for world domination?" she teased. Vivienne laughed softly, closing the notebook and setting it aside. "Something like that. I've been thinking about what's next." Caroline leaned back, interest lighting her face. "I want to expand beyond luxury high-rises," Vivienne said, her voice steady. "I want to develop spaces that actually serve people. Affordable housing, community parks, art centers. I've spent enough time chasing profit." She paused, letting the words settle between them. "Now, I want to build something meaningful." Caroline's smile widened, pride in her eyes. "That sounds exactly like the Vivienne I've always known." Vivienne's gaze drifted back toward the horizon, where sunlight danced across the glass towers of downtown Chicago. "It feels right," she said softly. "For so long I was focused on proving something, to Nathan, to the world, even to myself." She drew in a slow breath. "But now, I don't feel like I need to prove anything anymore. I just want to create something I can be proud of." The weight of her words lingered in the still morning air, a quiet testament to how far she had come, and how much further she was ready to go. There had been a time when her identity had been tied to Nathan's success, when her worth was measured by how seamlessly she played the role of the supportive wife. But now? Vivienne was writing her own story, and in this one she wasn't a supporting character. She was the protagonist. Caroline nudged her playfully. "You do realize you're the talk of the town, right? The woman who outsmarted Nathan Devereux and took control of his biggest project? It's practically legendary." Vivienne chuckled, shaking her head. "I didn't do it for the headlines, but you made them," Caroline insisted. "Investors are talking. Clients are lining up to work with you. Even the board members who once doubted you, they're singing your praises." Vivienne sipped her coffee, letting the warmth sink into her chest. She appreciated Caroline's words, but what mattered most wasn't recognition or applause. It was peace, inner peace. The path had been brutal. There were moments when she'd questioned everything, when the pressure of her choices nearly crushed her. But each setback had strengthened her. And now she stood on the other side of it, at the peak of her own success. The phone buzzed in her bag. She glanced at the screen. A message. From Nathan. "Can we meet? Just to talk." Her fingers hovered above the screen. The memory of their last conversation played in her mind, when he had acknowledged his downfall, but also shown signs of change, a willingness to learn. She had caught glimpses of the man she once loved, the man driven by vision, not pride. Could he really change? Could he rebuild? Caroline noticed her hesitation. "Nathan?" Vivienne nodded slowly, locking her phone without replying. "He wants to meet. And do you want to see him?" Caroline asked gently. Vivienne stared out at the skyline, her thoughts swirling. "I don't know. Part of me wants closure. Another part wonders if opening that door is worth it." Caroline placed a warm hand on her shoulder. You don't owe him anything. If you meet him, do it for you, not for him. Vivian nodded. She appreciated that reminder. For too long, she had made decisions based on what was expected. Not anymore. She slipped the phone back into her bag. She'd give herself time. A child's laughter floated up from the street below. Vivian leaned over the railing, spotting a young girl chasing a red balloon, her mother watching from nearby. That joy, so pure, brought a soft smile to her lips. Even in a world full of chaos, there was beauty. Vivian turned back to Caroline, her decision made. I think I'm ready to close that chapter. Whether I see Nathan or not, it won't change what I've built or where I'm going, but maybe it'll help me let go. Caroline nodded with approval. Then do it. On your terms. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the skyline, Vivian felt something she hadn't in a long time. Renewal. Her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. With or without Nathan, she knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. And that knowledge was more powerful than any victory. Later that afternoon, Vivian sat in her office, reviewing the final details of her community project proposal. Outside, the sound of construction echoed, a living testament to progress. She signed the last page, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled with quiet satisfaction. Her phone buzzed again. Not a message from Nathan this time. A notification. Investor approval confirmed. Vivian smiled. She didn't need validation from anyone else. With every decision, every step forward, she was proving she could thrive on her terms. She gathered her things, paused for a moment, and let the pride wash over her. She had earned this. She had fought for it. And she had won. With her head held high, Vivian walked out of her office, ready for whatever came next. The world was hers now, and for the first time in her life, she knew how to claim it. Dear friend, there comes a time in all of our lives when we must stop asking for permission to become who we are. Vivian's journey reminds us that we don't rise by rewriting the past, we rise by reclaiming the present. The Stoics believed that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves, and in choosing peace over pride, clarity over chaos. Vivian didn't just close a chapter, she opened a new one on her own terms. Wherever you are in your story, know this: you don't need to be anyone's supporting role. You already have everything it takes to be the main character. Own your path, lead your life, and never forget, you're allowed to begin again. If this story moved you, we'd be so grateful if you gave it a like, shared it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire strength, resilience, and renewal.